Okay, guys, good morning. Today we're going to work on energy flow, which are like food webs and food chains. And I know you did some of that stuff in earth science and probably in elementary school. But before we do that, let's kind of review the introduction to ecology that we did yesterday. So if you would with me, I have the terms from yesterday here and then pictures here. I want you to help me match them. So what would be a good example for an organism? Remember, you're looking for one particular thing. So I think that would be D. So I'm going to put a D over here. Okay. How about a biome? Remember, a biome is a region of the earth that has specific characteristics. So I think that could either be E or B. Okay, but what I want you to remember, a biome is bigger than an ecosystem, so I want you to zoom out, like if you could take a camera and zoom out. So I think B would be the best option for biome. Okay, population, remember that's a bunch of the same thing, so I think the best answer for that is A, where all these D are R. Okay, ecosystem, that's the one we debated about a minute ago with biome. It's basically a habitat. So I'm going to go with E here. You can definitely tell that that's a forest. Okay, community, remember that has no abiotic factors in it. So I think that would be picture C here with the people, the deer, sorry, there ain't no deer, people, horses, dogs, trees, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go with C. And then biosphere, anytime you see a picture of the earth, that's a good representation of that. But remember, it's not the earth, it's just the areas of the earth that can take life, okay? All right, so for number 7 here, 3 abiotic factors. I'm not going to type anything, but remember, these are things that are non-living. So it could be anything that's surrounding you in your room right now that is not alive, but I also want you to think more of things that you can't see, like oxygen, air, the temperature, the amount of rainfall something gets every year, those kind of things. Okay, and then for number 8, plants, animals, and other living things in an environment are called blank factors. So your key word here is living. So all of these are biotic factors. And then number 9, the whole purpose of this unit, the study of organisms and how they interact, of course, is ecology, which is the unit that we're in right now. Okay, all right, so let's move on to energy flow, and I think you guys are going to do fine with this because it's actually not bad at all. In Google Docs, there is a form that I want you to have, where I'm going, okay, if you'll find it and pull it up, it's like a paper that has 10 boxes on it, and I would like you to put in the definition and also a picture if you don't mind. You can type it or you can print it and write in it. That's totally up to you. Okay, so we're going to start with autotroph. Auto means self, troph means feed. So autotroph is anything that can make its own food, okay? Now, I know you can go in the kitchen and make yourself something to eat. That's not what we mean by this. We mean that the organism can take things from the environment and create its own food. So autotroph is normally synonymous with plants. However, there are some plankton and other things that can make their own food that aren't technically plants. But if you want to think of this as plants, that's perfectly fine. Any organism that can make its own food. Now, the other word that is synonymous with autotroph is a producer. If you guys go in the produce department at any grocery store, what are you going to find? That's where all your fruits and vegetables and lettuce and celery and all those things are. And that's where that term comes from. Producer can produce its own food. So this is just another word for autotroph. So draw you any kind of plant in there, okay? All right, so the opposite of autotroph and producer is heterotroph. Hetero means different. So this is any organism that has to get their food from a different source. So they have to, quote unquote, eat. We are heterotrophs. Your dog is a heterotroph. Okay? A mushroom is actually a heterotroph because he can't take energy from the sun and make its own food. Okay, but I want you to use the word eat lightly. Obviously, all the pictured animals I have up here physically put food in their mouth, but again, think about that mushroom. Okay, it doesn't necessarily put food in its mouth, but it has to quote unquote eat. Okay, the other term that is a synonym for heterotroph is a consumer. You have to consume your food. Okay, so these bats obviously eat insects. They're putting them in their mouths. All those seashells over there are organisms inside that have to actually eat. So producer and autotroph mean the same thing, just as heterotroph and consumer mean the same thing. Okay, I think these next three are pretty easy for you guys. Herbivore, plant eat. These are things that eat nothing but plants. Okay, so elephants, rabbit, cow, deer, eats nothing but vegetation all day long. Okay. All right. Carnivore is kind of like, I'd say, the opposite of that. An organism that eats other heterotrophs. So these guys eat other animals pretty much. Okay, you're meat eaters. And this is easy for you to think of lions and bears and tigers and things like that. But I also want you to think of a frog. A frog doesn't eat vegetation. He eats nothing but insects. And even though he doesn't have the teeth that you think of with a carnivore, they're still considered a carnivore. Okay? All right, now, this one encompasses a lot of organisms. Omnivore, that means all eat. So these are things that eat both plants and animals. So if you look at the pictures there, a bear will eat fish, but it'll also eat honey, vegetation, things like that. Monkeys will eat vegetation, bananas, fruit, but they also eat the bugs off of each other. So that would be an example of an omnivore. And people, we are actually designed to be omnivores. So if you guys know anybody who is like a vegetarian by choice, just know that we are actually designed to be omnivores because we need both of those things. We have the teeth to be omnivores. Okay. All right, so the next one is a decomposer. So I am missing a picture up here. The two main decomposers I need you to remember are obviously mushrooms, but the other one is bacteria. So think about when you take trash out and how bad it smells sometimes. That is because there are decomposers in there feeding off the rotting food and stuff. Okay, so this is any organism that feeds off dead, decaying matter. And y'all think about if we didn't have decomposers in our ecosystem, how terrible that would be. Think about every leaf that falls off of a tree in the fall. What if none of those ever went away? What if nothing ever fed off of them? Okay, so decomposers are extremely important in an ecosystem. All right, moving on. As a food chain is just a diagram that shows energy flow in an ecosystem. So if you'll look at mine up here, the leaf, the caterpillar, the bird. Okay, do you notice that the arrow is pointing the opposite direction that you would think? This doesn't mean the leaf eats the caterpillar. The arrows are meant to show energy flow. So the energy from the leaf flows into the caterpillar, and then when the bird eats the caterpillar, it flows into him. Okay, so a food chain is just like one particular set of links in an ecosystem. So when you move on to food webs, they're much more complicated because they show all the feeding relationships in a particular ecosystem, like who eats what all the way through. Okay, so food webs are actually a lot more complex than a food chain. All right, trophic level is just a feeding level in a food web or chain. So all of your autotrophs, your producers are going to be on the bottom of the pyramid, and all of your consumers are going to be near the top. And if you'll notice, this is much smaller than this, right? So to sustain an ecosystem, you have to have way more producers than you do top consumers up here. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay, last one that I want you to write in your paper. Biomass is just a combination of all the living things that are in ecosystem. Bio means life, mass means can like weight or total, right? So biomass can be a whole lot if you're talking about a rainforest, or it could be very little if you're talking about a tundra. Okay, that's what we mean by biomass. So let's take a look at some of these. This is a typical food chain that I just created here. Grass, cow, human. Okay, so I want you to think of all the terms that can apply to the grass. Well, it gets its energy from the sun, so it is an autotroph, which makes it a producer. Okay, how about the cow? The cow eats the grass, so it is an herbivore, all right? And you can also call it a primary consumer because it is the first thing to put food in its mouth. And then us humans here on the end, we would be a secondary consumer because we're the second things to eat because we eat the cow. Now, if we had a salad on our plate along with our steak, then we could be considered an omnivore. But in this particular picture, this little girl is actually strictly a carnivore, if that makes sense. Okay, all right, so here's an example of a food web. Your producers are your lettuce, your carrot, and your corn. All right, and then your consumers are everything else. So if you look at this, I want you to look at the picture and tell me which animal has no arrows pointing away from him. If you notice, that would be the owl and the fox. So these guys are your top carnivores. If we had to make a pyramid for this, they would be on the tip top. And then the ones on the bottom would be your lettuce, your carrot, and your corn down there. Okay? All right, so name the producer. That would be the sunflower. It's the only one. Name the primary consumers. Those are the guys that eat the sunflower. So that would be whatever this little bug is right here, this cricket, this caterpillar, and whatever that thing is, right? Those are all primary consumers. The secondary ones are things that eat them. So your ladybug, your kissing bug over here, and maybe even the mouse, okay? So let's look at number 4. This is a typical EOC question. What would happen if the ladybugs were killed off by a pesticide? So if all of these ladybugs died, I want you to think of what would happen, okay? First, let's go up the food chain. Do you think this bird would be okay? I'd say yes, because she eats plenty of other things, all right? But I want you to go backwards in the food chain. If we don't have the ladybug anymore, what's going to happen to this bug population? Well, there's nothing left to eat them, right? So those black bugs there would overpopulate, which then would eat too many of these plants, and that could destroy the entire ecosystem. Okay, so I want you to look forward and backward when they ask you questions like this. So if the bird no longer ate the cricket, how would its population be kept under control? So the bird no longer eats the cricket. What is still going to keep the cricket population under control? Well, just follow its other arrow. So that would be the mouse. The mouse would still help us keep that cricket population under control. Okay, I just want to zip through a few more of these. You see this complicated food web that's in an Antarctic Ocean? What is the one thing that keeps this entire ecosystem going? It's the phytoplankton on the bottom. So imagine something happened and the phytoplankton were gone. Look at all the other organisms that would suffer because of that. Okay? Now I want to show you this, and this is where I will end. So if you see a pyramid, the plants are always on the bottom. So these are always your producers, okay? These guys eat these guys. So your rabbits would be primary consumers because they are the first things that physically put food in their mouth. What other term can we use for them? Herbivores, because all they eat are plants, okay? Then the snakes in level C, I messed up. Oh, here it is. Secondary consumers because they eat the rabbits. And then the eagle up top is a tertiary consumer because he eats the snakes. So keep in mind, the higher you go up, the less organisms there are. Okay? And there is actually a rule here. If there are 1,000 plants here, okay, take that down by 10%. 1,000 plants could support 100 rabbits. Okay? And it takes 1,000 plants and 100 rabbits to support 10 snakes. And so I guess you can do this by process of elimination here. The tertiary consumers, it would be 1. So I want you guys to keep that in mind. It would take 1,000 plants to support 1 eagle, even though the eagle does not eat plants directly. Okay, so remember the rule of 10% as you go up that pyramid there. Okay. All right, so what I'd like for y'all to do next is fill out the Google form on energy flow, and we'll get a lot more practice with this tomorrow with some different assignments. So thank you for your attention. Please email me if you have any questions.